Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Unfolding the Soul. Today's guest is Anne, and she wants to talk about being adrift. Anne has been a relatively recent addition to the audience on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. She got us really quick into joining a clubhouse room on Monday. And that's me and Mark join her every Monday, and we talk about meaning-related subjects. So we've been really active with that lately. Yeah, so that's kind of about Anne, and she has this poem that she wants to perform for us. That's the word, I guess. And it's about being adrift. So take us off, Anne.
Thanks, Manuel. This is Adrift by Mark Nepo. Everything is beautiful, and I am so sad. This is how a heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. The light spraying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibers of memory, forming their web around the knot in my throat. The breeze makes the birds move from branch to branch, as this ache makes me look for those I've lost in the next room, in the next song, in the next laugh of a stranger. In the very center, under it all, what we have that no one can take, and all that we've lost face each other. It is there that I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I am so sad, and everything is so beautiful.
Well, that's real intense. Like, there's so much going on in that poem.
Yeah, right. It's like the quality of human experience is so ambivalent and contradictory. Mm-hmm. So there's the sadness and the beauty. And at the beginning of the poem, the sadness takes precedence, but at the end of the poem, the beauty takes precedence. So there's this wave-like motion, you know, the boat on the sea. And when you asked me for a word that described what I wanted to talk about today, the word adrift came to mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's start at the beginning, like when, because that's a pretty, intense feeling or way of being. So how did you come into contact with this idea of being adrift?
So I think because of my very conception and birth, you know, I was born to a 48-year-old woman in the 1960s, a 48-year-old woman. Now that would have been nothing, you know, back in 1900 or, you know, even up until the First World War. But at that time, no one did such a crazy thing. You know, she was married. She had a career as a bookkeeper. She was a vivacious, flirtatious, accomplished career woman. And she had married this fellow, and they'd been married a few years. And then suddenly, you know, and I can imagine my mother going, "You gotta be joking," right? So why did she do that crazy thing to have that baby? But she did. So I came into the world in a little bit of an adrift way, born to these people who, you know, were not starting a family, didn't particularly want me, in a way, maybe benignly neglected me, you know, shuttled off to the grandma or the aunt or, you know, the neighbors. And I was telling you a little before we turned on the record that my own teenager, who's going to be a senior next year, just decided not to go to school for 2 weeks. And the schools today can bear with that. He's on a point system, so he gets credit for what he does. Everyone is learning at their own pace. But when I was a kid, it wasn't like that. Everyone went around in a group and you all learned the same things. So I was a bit adrift due to this crazy family situation of I'd go to school, then I wouldn't go to school. I'd watch school on the public television and do the yoga or the penmanship class or the little sofa music class. And then I'd go back to school. And then I'd be watching sci-fi TV. And then maybe I'd go back to school. So there was this adriftness, that was always there due to my very strange way of coming into the world. Mm-hmm.
So how did you experience that? Like, was that negative, or was it just normal, or was it exciting?
I think that I experienced it at the time as that I was being naughty by doing this, that I belonged in school and I belonged to be one of the crowd doing things at the same time as everyone around me. But I was being very naughty because I was, staying up too late or watching television, or my parents were irresponsible, or, goodness knows. But I definitely felt like it was a very abnormal thing to do. Yes. In retrospect, I think I did enjoy it, but at the time I felt that it was a very, very strange type of family. Yeah.
Yeah. Was it also special strange, or was it more like you're not fulfilling social requirements?
We were not fulfilling the social requirements. My mother, when I was 10 years old, became disabled due to a lung condition. And she suddenly had to quit her job. And when I turned 58, I began to experience so many somatic symptoms, feeling that my health was leaving me, even though I don't have any debilitating medical conditions of my own. So, it was such a strange connection with my own mother that I re-experienced that at that age for a while. So my whole life changed when I was 10 years old and suddenly had a very sick but stay-at-home mother. And a mother who would say, "You're very smart. I'm sure you'll be fine. You're smart. You're smarter than I am. You're so smart. You'll have a better life than me because you're so smart. I don't understand anything you're saying because you're so smart." And so this became really the kind of this crazy making thing in my life, and certainly in my relationship with my mother was, I can't be smarter than my own mother. I'm depending on her to make our life work and take care of me. I can't be smarter than my own mother. And what does it mean that a 10-year-old child is supposed to understand the world in a way that a 58-year-old woman doesn't understand it? It was very crazy making. And it just got worse, for the next decade, in which I went off to college and would come home in the summers. And then when I was halfway through college, my mother's health took a turn for the worse and she died. I was home for the Christmas holiday, and within 3 days we were in the hospital holding her hand while she breathed her last and spit up blood and was no more.
So
yes.
well, I'm trying to go through this trajectory, right? So you're in this strange relationship with your mom, and I feel that she, in some sense, she didn't want to give you or take responsibility for you with that phrasing, right? Like you're so smart and therefore I don't have to do. That's what I fill in my head. Do you agree with her now that you were smarter at 10? Like, do you think that was accurate?
No, not at
What?
all. I think it was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
It was a completely ridiculous assumption for an adult, parental figure to make.
And what did that do to you apart from feeling a really strange relationship to your mom? Like, did that make you want to become smart, or did that avert your
No, I was already smart.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem was I was naive because I had no life experience. So I ridiculously went out into the world like the fool in the tarot deck and got into all kinds of trouble because I was so adrift, so very adrift, because I had been told I was so smart and therefore I would be able to navigate all kinds of situations that were completely beyond my ability to navigate.
Right. So there was was there hubris as well as naivety, or was it just naivety?
Oh, well, I'm sure there was hubris, because if you're told, oh, you're so smart, you're so smart, you're so smart. Yeah, you got a big head. Of course. And then you can't ask for help. You cannot ask for support because you are supposed to know what to do. Right. The Pythagorean theorem and balancing your bank account are completely different things.
That is yes. So then when your mom got sick, did you have to take over care for her, or was that something that you weren't responsible for?
So interestingly enough, I think in a retrospect, it probably would have made me grow up if I had had to do so. But my mother had an older daughter who I was not particularly close to from her first marriage. And that person took care of a lot of the things. Not all of the things. There was a giant house that was not legally my mother's. It had belonged to her mother and it had never been transferred. So it was legally just in limbo. And that house sat vacant, for several years after my mother's death. So, I think that I didn't have really any direct responsibility for anything. And that certainly did not serve me.
And did you feel the responsibility or need to take it?
No, because this other person did all of that. So no, I had no responsibility. And I do feel that that was counterproductive.
Right. So if we sketch your life then, right, like you're in high school, you're exploring, doing things, not taking responsibility, and slowly your mom is going out of your life, and then she dies, right? And then so what did that do to you? Like did that change the way that you were thinking, or did that confirm your identity of being a rebel and floaty? And
so it surprised me after she died how much I had depended on her as an anchor for my little boat. Because after she died, I suddenly was adrift, really adrift. I had no source of income. I had really no adult in my life that I could discuss things with. Of course, were there potential people available? Yes, but due to this thinking, this assumption, that I had about the value of cognitive intelligence, I felt I shouldn't have to consult anyone, right? So I made a lot of stupid mistakes. You know, I didn't apply for graduate school. I could barely even keep my kitchen clean in my little studio apartment. You know, it was like I really did not realize how much I was depending on my very, I would say, broken relationship with my mother as an anchor point in my life. It was shocking to me after her passing how much I actually did depend on her. That was the biggest moment of awakening. And that didn't happen right away, but over the few years afterward, I began to realize that one caring adult, even though she didn't have a lot of skills that she taught me, or a lot of direction that she gave me, there was a sense that I had her total acceptance at all times, right? And that was always my home that I could go back to. And suddenly, without those things, my cognitive intelligence became very something that I couldn't trust, because it was no longer anchored to anything in the real world. You know, I became, I would say, a very flighty person, a very emotionally dysregulated person, in and out of relationships, in and out of jobs. And so in retrospect, even, you know, a somewhat broken relationship with an accepting, caring parent, the enormous value of that in my life as a young person, and the enormous effect of having that snatched away partway through college, it's just an enormous life event, and one that still to this day, you know, affects me.
So I'm trying to figure out like in what way she was anchoring, because and I can imagine that it's something that is making you responsible in some way, that relationship, right? Like that she, by being alive and being in your life, that you contrasted yourself against her. Is that kind of good description?
You know, I think that she was always there, and she accepted me. That's about it. I think it's real simple. You know, she was not a mom who would, you know, constantly leave and go on trips or things like that. She was pretty much a homebody in her later years. And I could always go there on college break. And, you know, she was my anchor point. And I didn't even know it at the time, that she was that big of an anchor point. I thought I was so grown up, Manuel, because I understood a little bit about dialectical materialism and Western philosophy, you know, and, you know, could get by a little bit in a couple of European languages. I thought I was just so great. But honestly, I couldn't keep my dishes washed. I couldn't figure out who to be friends with and who was trouble. You know, what is that saying?
Yeah, seems like you privileged one aspect of relating to the world and weren't aware of the other aspect. And yeah, and I guess I can see it now. It's a place to lick your wounds, right? Like that's more the stability, right? It's like I imagine the story that Peterson talks about the cat, right? Like, and the cat like walks out and then goes back to the place of safety, and then goes further and further, and then when you don't have the place of safety anymore, right? Like you need to find a new way. I mean,
yeah, and I didn't find any place of safety for a long time.
So yeah, first you have to recognize that you don't have a place of safety. So how does that realization occur? Like how do you get there?
You know, it's funny because I think it was invisible to me. You know, the way a lot of things about a culture are invisible as we live within that culture. You know, as participants, we don't stop and analyze a lot of things. We just take them for granted. So I do think that that was a big part of what happened for me is I began to explicitly look for experiences that I could participate in life that provided things like consistency, stability, routine, you know, groundedness. So I began to spend a number of years seeking out and building up that skill set, you know, and I got pretty good at it for the most part.
Right. So it was something you were more so acting out, and then in reflection, you're like, oh, like I'm looking for the stability that was there at one point in my life.
Yeah. 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 I didn't even think of the stability as something. I think I thought of it as just, oh, there's my mom. She doesn't have anything going on in her life. She's at home all the time, you know, drinking coffee and watching television. That's no life. But I didn't really see that what she was doing was being an anchor for somebody, for me. I didn't even realize it. And a funny thing is, you know, when I was 18 and going into college, I wrote about my mother as my hero in my college entrance essay. And that was 2 years before her death. So I think on some level, I was beginning to appreciate her. And yet, you know, I didn't fully integrate that until many years after her death.
Well, so at least you were able to see the value, right? Like, because having your mom as a hero, that's something.
That was
so,
a moment of inspiration at 2 a.m. when I typically would write my essays.
have you ever read it back?
No, I wish I could find it. I'm sure it was put in the shredder decades ago.
Because it would be interesting to see like what types of relationships you highlighted in the hero aspect. And,
Yeah, I do know that one of the family stories was my mother was the only person in the family who had a job during the Depression. And she was the one that kept the cash flow in the house during the Depression. You know, but then some other relatives sort of forgot about that when they did well in business years later. They forgot about those lean years when she was the breadwinner, and they shamed her, you know, for not having much in her retirement days. I will never forget my aunt's husband, my mother's sister's husband, screaming at my mother when we would go and visit in their home for the sisters to spend time together. He would scream at her and shame her for being a divorcee, for being insecure in her retirement. And I didn't understand this as a child. But as an adult, I've begun to see that I think he desired her. And because he couldn't have her, he was cruel to her. I'll never know.
Wow. Yeah, there's always when there's intense behavior, there's always something behind that.
That's what made study the mind, right? Both, anthropology and psychoanalysis. What is really going on,
Mhm. So taking the adrift metaphor, so like I'm imagining the flotsam or whatever, and you're just floating around, and then you realize, oh, there's an anchor, and I can use an anchor, right? So now you have two tools, right? You have two aspects that you use to navigate your life. So how do you go forward from there? Like what? Because like I imagine that the realization of being adrift. Well, yeah, you talked about the studying the mind, right? Like you're trying to compensate something there, right? Like you're trying to find a ground to stand on, something where. Well, I'm projecting too much. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. So at the same time I was doing that, I've talked about creating a lot of rhythm and routine. In my life, I got involved in Waldorf education. I started a family, and I got into a community that has a lot of predictability. You celebrate the seasons of the year. All the first graders are doing certain activities. All the second graders are doing certain activities. It's a kind of a developmentally prepared curriculum. And so I became like sort of a workaholic in a sense, and a volunteeraholic, and just delved into having an enormous amount of responsibility within my community. And I guess that was how I tried to anchor myself, So I'm now seeing that little boat as having a mast and a sail on it, in addition to having an anchor, that, that this little boat could not just be tossed about by the waves and the winds, but it could also, put up its mast and hang its sail and use the winds to carry it to its destination. Right. So I began to I think be a little bit more self what do I want to say, intentional, and to realize that, well, my boat is still on the surface of the water. After all these years, it has not sank to the bottom. So maybe now I can not be afraid of sinking and begin to ride these waves and sail this wind in the direction of things that I value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was going to the value aspect, right? But like I do think that the workaholic aspect is still like you're trying to clench onto something, right? Like there's a nature there that if you don't rejuvenate enough, it perishes. So in some sense you're creating your own sail, but you're also creating your own prison in being dependent on the community to ground you. So how did you realize that you were in this dependent relationship, or was it more a natural flow?
So it had to do with thinking, because for some weird reason, like I keep thinking, right? And the kinds of thinking I do keep growing and becoming more. You're laughing, you know what I'm talking about. So I'd be in my community, and I would notice contradictions or difficulties, and I would point them out, and then I would be shushed, or I would just realize, okay, so this group is not ready for this type of thinking, for this level of change. So maybe it's time for me to pull up my anchor and put my sail up and sail off to another state, and start a new career. And, you know, but this is not being flighty, I don't think, because this was after a number of years of doing the same thing, you know, like almost 2 decades of doing this. And then I shifted and, you know, moved to a different state and took up a different career. So yes, I was adrift again. I did it to myself that time, you know, with my darn thinking.
Did you actually manage to achieve the group around you that you felt like you needed, or was that like a dream that was never going to be fulfilled?
The group around me, well, no, I've kind of given up on that any group could provide me with security. Really, I think it's just a matter of enough interdependence to be healthy. You know, I'm not looking for a group with a unitary theory that, you know, we can all, you know, die peacefully because we understand the theory of everything, you know, and only we in our little group understand it perfectly, you know, like the Vervakeists or whatever, you know. So I'm interested in groups because they help me bullshit myself less. I'm interested in groups because they can be a mirror for me to see how I'm doing, and maybe I can be a mirror to the others. And also, I think, you know, through extended cognition, we can maybe achieve some things together that we can't separately. Yeah, but I don't think I'm naive anymore, you know, and that's good. It took me longer than the average bear to stop being naive.
Yeah, we're all naive in some ways, so don't be too hard on yourself in that sense. So I'm still interested in how do you make a decision to leave a group because they're not ready to change, right? Like how do you do relevance realization about like what a group needs to change in and what's okay for a group not to change?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, for me with the Waldorf Steiner community, just to take that as an example, I got tired of not being able to solve certain problems. They were, I guess, perennial problems. And I could see solutions, and but I didn't feel like the community was open to those solutions. So I think my level of idealism on the one hand and frustration on the other just compelled me to say, well, are there groups with whom I might share more of the values? Even though I do share a number of values with this group, it's possible I could find some other group or groups that I share even more values with. So I can, you know, look for that. So I guess that's how it's happened for me.
And so, well, how do you go about finding a new group that shares your values? That sounds like a tough question. Like how do you know?
Well, I mean, you do something that you like, and you see if you connect with somebody who's also doing that thing that you like. So for instance, you know, in the Steiner world, I got into the movement activity that Rudolf Steiner developed, eurythmy, which is kind of like, you know, Qigong or Tai Chi in many ways. And that led me to other colleagues who also practice mindful movement, you know, like Tai Chi, Qigong, contact improvisation, ecstatic dance. So suddenly this whole world of movement colleagues opened up. And I had to be willing to have conversations with people that were outliers to the group that I was involved in at that time. And some people within that group did not like that I was doing that. You know, I would make appointments and go and visit practitioners who were considered outliers. And I was told, well, they are going to influence you. Wow, they are going to influence you. So
that's the purpose, right?
The bad boys and the bad girls were going to influence me. So they did influence me, but I didn't join their group, so to speak. I just had my mind opened by entertaining their point of view for a while, right? I wanted to understand what led them to become an outlier within that tradition. Mm-hmm. And by visiting their space and speaking with them and seeing their work, I understood how they had connected the dots and come to their conclusions and why they took their work in the direction that they did. Now, I didn't end up doing what either of those two particular people did. I was more influenced by one who suggested that we work with other movement modalities. And so I was pretty influenced by that person. And so I've continued to do that. I don't know if we're getting too far afield here from the topic, but you know, if I want to relate this back to my little boat on the sea after my mother's death, you know, I literally, as an adult, at that time I was in my 40s when I was, or actually early 50s when I was going through all of that, a person who had had a more contained childhood might have achieved those developmental milestones in their late 20s or early 30s. But for me, it was early 50s. Mm-hmm. But I did it, right? I was able to hold my individual identity and participate in a number of groups that I had some shared value with. So I had these intersectional, you know, identities, and I still can carry that.
So I was connecting the movement practices to grounding yourself. So does that connect to being adrift as well, like the movement practices?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Because I remember being a child, Manuel, and saying nobody moves around here. Nobody moves. And I was literally like told it was not safe to like ride my bike around the neighborhood, take walks around our neighborhood. And in retrospect, I don't think it was a terribly frightening neighborhood. It was one of these neighborhoods of old houses that some have been subdivided into apartments. The neighborhood was beginning to make a comeback, a turnaround, but it was kind of in transition. And it was in no means a ghetto or a slum or anything, but the assumptions, you know, from my mother and before her, my grandmother, were they had seen the decline of the neighborhood during their lifetime. And so to them, it was a terrible, dangerous neighborhood. But that meant as a young child, I couldn't leave our yard. And I felt so much like I couldn't move my physical body. And I think it became where I didn't have social fluidity or enough intellectual fluidity because I didn't have the physical movement. So you can guess what I'm doing in my professional work these days. I'm working on this very subject, right, with other colleagues who see the value not only in bringing movement to adults in a remedial sense, but also to young people on the autism spectrum whose intellectual abilities and social abilities begin to prosper as they engage in healthy movement activities. So my own limitation became the one subject that I'm the most passionate about.
The wounded healer. So you said you were watching yoga on TV when you were a kid. Like, didn't that break the movement stagnation a little bit, or was that just something that was passing?
No, the hatha yoga lady was lovely. We get into the child's pose and the cobra and the lion, but you know, you're sitting still on a mat.
Mm. Yeah.
And yeah, that was not for me. I still remember that lady. I'm so grateful for her and the other wonderful folks that got on educational television back in the 1960s and 70s. So they made a difference in my life.
You could probably look them up on YouTube, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, so were there other aspects of the Steiner stuff that you felt particularly drawn to, or was it because I know they're doing plays, like is that part of the way that you're conceiving of movement, or like?
Well, I definitely think that role playing is an important way to learn. You know, I'm very aware when we're over on the server, you know, in groups, that we're each in a role for that moment, right? Like Searle's speech act theory, you know, words, in fact, are acts
Yeah.
of a certain kind. So, yeah, so I mean, what I think I loved about, and still do, about Steiner education is there's this emphasis on integrating all of the aspects of the human being, the artistic, the intellectual, the nutrition, the sleep, all of these aspects of life, and also the social aspect. And that is a little bit of a funny part of Steiner culture, because anyone in that movement can tell you they're not particularly social. They really struggle with being truly social. But being social is a big banner, you know, that's waved. But if you actually get into one of those branches or study groups or schools or even the farms, you'll find that there's a lot of asocial or downright antisocial things going on. But that is because this is the challenge of our time, I think, is to learn to be truly social. So, you know, it's no wonder that they're struggling with it, because all groups are struggling with it right now.
Yeah, and I can imagine that, because the Steiner people that I met, right, like they were all a little bit strange, and like fair enough, right, because they were doing strange things in relation to the norm in society, right? So I can imagine that if you get out of your bubble, right, like you're relating to all of these people that don't do what you do, and like how do you engage with that? Like that's, yeah, I can see the difficulty there as well.
Yeah, but you can learn to hold your center. I mean, there's a practice that I started doing, you know, 10 years ago, that was given by Rudolf Steiner, where you awaken in the morning, and while you're still in that liminal state, you say this verse, you know, in pure rays of light gleams the source of the world. In pure love for all beings streams the source of my soul. I will rest in the source of the world. I will find my own I in the source of the world. And then you do some 3 centers breathing that he's actually adapted to 4 centers, including the throat. But other than that, it's similar to what's done in the in Kundalini or in the Tibetan tradition, where you breathe, where you focus on centers as you inhale and exhale. And you do this with these 4 centers, and you have certain very short mantras. You know, I am, it thinks, she feels, he wills, that you say to yourself as you inhale and exhale out of these 4 centers. And then you think about your own divine ideal, whatever that is, and it can change over the months and years that you do this practice for, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So this whole practice is like a 5-minute practice. And I did this for years and years upon awakening. And it jerked a lot of slack out of me. It's a real simple practice, but I think he thought it out well, because it hits a lot of the high points that you want a transformative practice to hit. And suddenly I was kind of walking around in a non-dual state. I was less reactive. I was very connected with the transcendentals and all that. 5 minutes, that's a lot of bang for your buck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not doing 5 minutes, that's for sure. Like, I'm doing way more.
Yeah, there are many paths up these mountains. So I don't know. In retrospect, I would have to say that my life was perfect. I have to say that to have faith. I have to say that somehow it was all perfect. The episodes of benign neglect were all perfect. I couldn't have possibly turned out to be this person, at this stage of my life if I had not gone through all of those things exactly as they happened. If I had gone right to graduate school, I would have probably been the most unsufferable egotist, completely useless, writing 150 stupid academic papers that no one will ever read. And if a number of other things had gone differently, I could have become the most insufferable, useless slug. But it didn't happen, because I kept getting, adrift and then collecting myself again.
Yeah, so this breathing practice and doing it for like 10 years. So how does that change who you are, and not in the sense that it's removing all the slog, but in the sense of like how you see yourself, or like how you are grounded, right? Like how you're anchored.
Yeah. Well, so the beautiful part about it, Manuel, is suddenly not only am I the boat that's on the waves, but I am also the waves, and I am the wind, and I am the floor of the sea, and I am time itself that is streaming on. So suddenly, I can literally find my own I in the source of the world. So it's suddenly not myself against my surroundings, but I can have, epistemic trust, because I and the world are one. That sounds really sappy now that I hear myself say it. But when it's actually happening to you, like it's pretty cool, because you feel a little like a martial artist of the mind, where you can kind of navigate situations knowing that the things that are happening to you are also a part of you, and you can work with them.
So I think we're approaching the now. So you've done the movement. You started getting interested. I don't know if you were already, but in the Kokusai aspect, right? In the more mindy part of the equation, the thing that everybody seems to be converging on is like, oh yeah, the world is attention. How do we do that? So yeah, what brought you there?
Well, so I started looking for anybody and everybody that was writing or publishing or streaming anything that perked my ears up. I started following my interest, and suddenly this whole world opened up. And part of it was I chose to go live in Palo Alto, where Stanford is. And so there's not only the ivory tower academia of Stanford, but there's also this, business subculture and this, kind of Grateful Dead hippie subculture up there. And so it's a very rich place. And there's a lot of interactivity. Stanford's an open campus. So you'll go to a conference over there and there'll be homeless people who've signed up for the conference, and retired hippies, as well as people that are active, in their field today. And they actually want that in the culture up there. So I just, plopped myself down in the middle of that culture and started working and doing trying to create flow states in lots of different unexpected settings. Basically had a sort of a mobile flow state lab.
Personally, or like with more people?
With other people.
Okay.
Yeah, with other people. And it was like, what are the conditions to create these optimal states? And when are we moving into an ecstatic state versus when are we moving into a state of communitas? And how we can control that. It's like Pac-Man's mouth, right? How can we control that process? So I just started playing, and I was like, hey, you've worked for, 25 years, and now it's time for you to play. So I just became very playful. And that's how I ended up getting in with the Coxsci people. I don't take it too seriously. I just play.
Yeah. Do they like that in that field?
Did I like that?
No, the people in the field, the Coxsci people, like, do they like someone who's not taking it seriously?
Yeah. In fact, one person up there hosts a little weekly kind of like get together, and they deliberately want to keep it playful. So it's not really a think tank. I joke that it's a funk tank, right? Because it's a social, it's a place to get into reverie. And so we'll have AI people, artists, educators, dancers, and it's a place to just get into reverie together. And then people go back to their work with maybe some insight that came to them during this time of reverie. And of course that, goes back to the work of Winnicott and the work of Freud, and farther back, of course, to, shamanic psychotechnologies, right, that get you into states of reverie so you can set yourself up for insight.
Mm-hmm. So what have you learned so far about the Coxsci and helping you grounding yourself from being adrift? Like is that a fruitful path for you?
Yeah, I think so, Manuel. I think, I like 4E Coxsci because it does take into account the cultural and the social aspects, as well as the embodied aspects. But of course leaves room for traditional, and technological paths, with the extension, So what I'm finding is that it's as if certain neural networks are turning on not only within people, but among groups of people. I don't fully understand that, and I'm not quite sure yet how we're going to measure it, but it does seem like there's a lot of cross-fertilization that is able to happen a good deal after the pandemic has forced pretty much everybody into a life that's 50% or more online now. There's just something, I think there's already been studies about changes in the human body, even among children who are being born who have extra muscles in the right hand due to the parents' use of micro movements for smart devices. I mean, that's just crazy how quickly it's affecting the phenotype. So, you know, to suggest that we've got a lot of neural networks that have been forming and will continue to form, you know, I don't think that's spooky or far-fetched at all. I just think it's hard to measure yet. So I don't know, you know, I'm continuing to do this really crazy thing. Like I work for a nonprofit here in LA so that I can have access to certain populations that I couldn't have access to without that. So I go into like at-risk youth or with unhoused people because I think that what's going on in their minds and their whole embodied experience is an important part of the shared cognitive and cultural experience of our time. And, you know, the phrase "nothing about us without us" applies. So I'm still sort of just someone who has to have a foot in a lot of different areas and be working with a lot of different populations and methodologies that might not necessarily seem to go together. But that's something that I'm continuing to do.
Right. So because that's completely different than what we do on Meaning Mondays with the Clubhouse. So
yeah, we're just making truth claims, constant truth claims over there. I love that space.
We are making truth claims, but apart from it being fun and dipping your toe in a lot of pools, like where do you see that going? Like where does the thinky thing and the dealing with the people feeling stuff and the flow states, like how does that come together?
So my guy Hegel talked about the necessity for the moral to become united with the natural. So the moral law and the natural law would come together. And that's, you know, in the phenomenology of spirit, that's where he's going with that whole, you know, 700 pages to make his point. 700 pages to make one truth claim. I just love that the mind of Hegel. And so what I'm beginning to see is that, you know, that the development of the mind, you know, goes through these developmental stages, and they're pretty much, they're labeled somewhat differently by different theorists, you know, Piaget, Vygotsky, Hegel, you know, Freud, whatever, but you've got relative consistency on what is happening, where you go, you know, from a participatory to a more teleological to then a more state that allows abstraction to then a state that's more point of view based, perspective based, and you can already see your 4 P's model in this this development of thought. So the stage beyond the perspectival is the one that I'm interested in, and that's the reflective state, because that's a state that sets you up for the potential of insight. And insight is where the moral law begins to come into the physiology through thought and resonate and inform the physiology. So then you have the virtues establishing neural correlates in the brain through this activity of the mind. So I'm currently interested in developing ways to set up that process and to ameliorate for stuck points or undeveloped pre-mental stages, and be able to get as many people as possible to transcend the limitations of the psychological equivalence state or phase of thinking, which limits you to your own point of view. Because that's going to be the death of America if we can't transcend it. And so we want to create all different kinds of psychotechnologies, if you will, conversational technologies, counseling room technologies, educational modalities that will allow us to leverage the attachment bond to allow the flowering of reflective thinking in individuals, and that will allow insight to occur to the mind, and that may, if I'm lucky, save the United States culture from imploding within the next decade. That's pretty much, that's my little project. That's my project.
Yeah, that's why you hired me. So yeah, one of the things that I always like to bring up, and I don't want to turn this into a Clubhouse room, but like if you guys want to join, we're on Clubhouse every Monday at 12 Eastern. Yeah, my bugaboo with this stuff is always submission.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like in order to get people to get out of the ego state and into the reflective state, right? Like that ego needs to be small enough to be able to start looking out. Yeah, maybe you have a couple of words about that.
Yeah, I think the ego needs to be right-sized.
Mm-hmm.
So it can turn itself inside out, and the I becomes the EYE, becomes the mind's eye.
So you're having your toes in a few ponds, and at least my experience is that it's always like, oh, one more thing, right? It's like the horizon shifts and you just keep chasing the horizon. So yeah, like if everything goes the way that you want it to go, like what do you see happen in the next 5 years?
Well, my kids are gonna go to college. Isn't that wonderful? And who knows, maybe I'll just start taking care of goats, because other people who are much better facilitators and educators than I will ever be will have gotten the aha and be going around training reflective thinking. And I won't have to do anything. I can just be like the wise old woman that just smiles and says yes. Yes.
Ooh, you don't want to be involved in the project?
Well, so Harrison Owen, the originator of open space technology, said, if they forget all about me and think that they did it themselves, I have done my job.
Mm-hmm. So you want to inspire people. That's your ticket to victory.
Yeah. I just have this one little tiny idea at the end of the day. And it's that, if you can transcend perspective and develop reflective thinking, that's going to make all the difference in the world. That's the one little idea. And I think because that's what happened for me, right? That's how I stopped being so adrift.
Yeah, I would add that there's an embodied aspect that also quite you
Mhm.
grounded. So I wouldn't only put it on a reflectivity, and this goes probably back to the developmental stages, right, where you can't go too fast. You need to have the experience, like you said, right? Like you needed to go through what you needed to go through in order to get where you are. So yeah, like there's a necessary lag,
Mhm.
and I'm now thinking of that the education just keeps going longer and longer and longer, right? Like people stop studying when they're 30s, in their 30s, right? It's like you're already halfway there, like,
Mhm.
and now you're going to start working, but there's this problem, right, where we seem to have extended this period, and then even then we're not including all of these embodied aspects in the proper way.
Mhm. Mhm.
So let's say you're this, I was going to say den mother, but I'm not sure if that's the right word, but let's just use that, right? You have all of these CEOs and stuff that come to you for advice when they get this hurdle, like what do you think you're gonna tell these people? Like, is that a thing that you're ready for, the giving that advice and steering them in the right direction?
No, I'm going to make them think.
Yeah, you're doing the Socratic.
Yeah, well, Columbo did a lot of that Socratic stuff. Detective Columbo, right?
That's an interesting frame.
Oh,
Just think of
well,
that.
so the idea is that I should become, less and less and less. And anyone that I work with, I want them to begin to think in deeper and richer ways. And yes, and including the embodied and emotional and relational aspects of thinking. Otherwise we're down stuck in the abstract level, which has a pretend quality to it. We want to transcend that. So yeah, so I'm not important. What's important is, this phenomenology of spirit taking hold of the minds of man.
So to recast it in the being adrift. Um, Are you describing yourself as an anchor for others? Is that where you wound up?
Mm. That's very interesting you would say that, Manuel. People have said things like that about me. So sometimes people might say in their mind, what would Anne do? So I'm becoming a little bit of that, that person that someone might think of when they're in a tough spot and might kind of,
Yeah, internalizing the sage. Yeah, like
yeah,
I've heard that as well, and it makes me really uncomfortable. I was like, what? You're asking me? But yeah,
yeah,
who
yeah.
else?
But of course, that's only my best self, right? Like I still have a gnarly, gritty, everyday self that, that doesn't want to do my partner's laundry now that I'm, working and I'm not a full-time, housefrau anymore. I don't want to do his laundry. I probably should just be saintly and do it anyway, but I'm not there. So yeah, so there, fortunately, anyone who's internalizing this sage only is internalizing the ideal parts,
You know, persona.
Yeah, just the ideal parts.
Yeah, well, yeah, we all have our struggles with
Yeah.
laundry.
But I do plan backwards from my own death. You know, I'm sure when I turn 68 years old, I will have some strange experiences, you know, body memories from my mother's death when she was that age. I could even experience a health crisis around that age. Who knows? But I do live backwards from my own death at whatever age that will be. And in that moment, when I am drawing my last breath, I want to be able to look back and say, well, you know, did I live a good life? Did I, you know, hopefully bring some goodness into the world? So I'm my own worst judge, that's for sure. You know, I have the sort of guilty masochistic tendencies in my personality. And so I'm my own judge, and I'll be, you know, drawing my last breath, and I'll hopefully look back and say, well, you did more good than you did harm, especially the second half of your life. So, you know, now it's time to go and see what's on the other side. Probably nothing, but that's okay.
Sounds like you taking your own philosophy, learning how to reflect to its ultimate position, at least in relation to you, right? Like reflect from your whole life as a psychotechnology.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I gotta love those Epicureans. You know, I can have a little Epicurean school with the little rescued farm animals, you know, down the street, and you know, yeah, have a little garden. People can come to slow down and reconnect and start to reflect and say, you know, what is my moral bucket list that I want to accomplish before I draw my last breath.
Oh yeah, I have already a bunch of ideas. You can get a tea house, and then it's like everything that you order comes with like a reflection. Yeah, it's like, yeah. Yeah, I can go all the way with that stuff. Well, yeah. Maybe I'll come hang out there, because need to make myself a bakery, like get some fresh breads and stuff over there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so is there something you feel like you still wanted to mention?
No, just keep me honest. That's what philosophical friends do for one another. Keep me inspired and keep me from bullshitting myself too much.
I know that I think that's a natural state of me, keeping people honest around me. So yeah, so that, thank you for talking about your drifty life, and maybe you grounded it in your death. That's the ultimate grounding. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to invite everybody to join Anne, me, and Mark at Clubhouse, 12 Eastern on Mondays. Yeah, you want to do a little plug, Anne?
No, it's just kind of like this, only topic based.
Yeah.
So we take a different topic every week, and the three of us kind of set it up for the first, 45, minutes to an hour, and then we open the floor, and others can come up and, argue with us or make competing truth claims, and and it's all, it's all very, very civil, very attachment based. So I'd love to have you come. It's the name of the club is Talk Wisdom to Me. You can join that club on Clubhouse, or you can just look for one of us on Clubhouse and follow us, and then you'll see it.
Yeah, and I'll provide a link below. So everybody, I would like you to leave your takeaways in the comments so that we can share our insights with other people, and obviously Anne will be able to receive those as well. Maybe she can get some new points of reflection. And I'll see you guys at the next episode of Unfolding the Soul.
Okay, and some of y'all might want to get interviewed because
Yeah, that as well. I need more people.
yeah, and like it's really very vulnerable to go through this, but it's also like, when are you going to get 2 hours of someone's undivided attention like this? You know, I think psychoanalysis is a couple $100 an hour. So, you know, hey, yeah, help yourself and help Manuel and help those who watch your interview.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.